I recently saw a really interesting drone show that was held in China, and it was actually a Guinness World Record where the Chinese team launched, I think it was 10,000 drones at the same time being controlled by a single computer. And it was really cool to see. You've probably seen these if you have watched any of the amazing videos that come out of China about the drones and stuff. And they have these shows quite frequently now where there'll be 1,000 drones in the air being operated to create different patterns, faces and flowers and animals and faces and buildings and all kinds of things. And it's really impressive to watch because China has been developing their drone technology for a really long time. Probably the last about 10 to 15 years is when drones, like commercial drones, started to come on the market. Some of the first ones were in the early, 2010, 2012, kind of the early 2010s. So it's been about 10, 15 years now that drones have really kind of made it into the commercial space, kind of the everyday person can go and buy a drone. So many people have drones. As a matter of fact, I even have a little drone here with a camera, and this is kind of a photography drone. Many people have these and they've become quite popular. We can fly it outside, you can take pictures of aerial shots, right? So about 10 years ago, they really started to become popular. And DJI was kind of the first major breakthrough, I would say, in terms of commercial drones. They started to produce and manufacture and sell commercial drones. And this became real popular, especially for photographers and video content creators. People on YouTube, especially travel channels, would have these beautiful shots of them running down the beach and being like, oh, look how amazing my life is. And China's continued to develop this technology. Some of the biggest drone companies are from China. DJI, like I said, is probably the largest commercial drone company in the world. They control about 80% of the market, depending on where you look. And they put out quite a few nice drones in the past few years. So you're probably wondering, what does this title have to do with this video? I'm talking about commercial drones, and why would America fear China's drone industry? Well, issue with drones is, although they're very useful and fun to play with, they are also incredibly dangerous if you create military applications out of them. So most people, when they buy a drone, it's for fun or it's for work. Many people use it for surveying. If you're a business, you might use it for surveying land. If you're a farmer, you might use it for pest control or for crop identification and just surveying your crops. If you have acres and acres of land, you might have a drone go out and survey your crops just to make sure there's no pests or anything. If you're a fire department, you might use it, especially if there's a large forest, you might use it to survey the forest to make sure there's no forest fires. They're very, very useful for commercial purposes, but they're also very dangerous if converted to military applications. So we can see right now the war in Ukraine has been going on for like 2 years. And if you're on Twitter, X, you'll see drone footage constantly of Ukrainian drones or Russian drones dropping weapons or kamikazing into a tank or into a building and blowing up on impact. And this is why the United States fears China's drone industry, because if you think about how destructive drones can be and how cheap they are to produce, then you start to realize that a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier is essentially obsolete now in the world of today's modern warfare. If I can produce 10,000 drones for less than $1 million and send them towards your aircraft carrier, I don't have to sink your aircraft carrier. I just have to destroy your runway. And that makes your aircraft carrier basically a giant brick, just floating out there waiting for the cleanup crew, so to say, to come out and sink it. Basically, drones can and will be used for military applications from here on out, basically. for surveying where enemy troops are, for dropping ammunitions and resupply, for actually attacking. Lots of companies around China and in the United States, Amazon and other companies have been trying to develop drone delivery systems. So if you can develop a drone delivery system that can deliver packages and food for everyday consumers, then you can create that system for the military. You can resupply your troops with the drones. And all of a sudden, when you start looking at the drone industry from that standpoint, China becomes very scary. They can produce millions of drones per year, and they can retrofit many of their companies if they want to have military applications. So how do you fight something like that? Well, one way that you can try and stop this development is through embargoes, and through tariffs, and through sanctions. And we've seen that throughout the last few years. The United States has tried to sanction the, export or import of chips. As we know, most of these technologies require some type of chip to, a CPU, a processing chip, to operate. Whether that's the hardware or the software, it needs processing power, the chips, to actually run most of this kind of advanced technology. So the United States has tried to essentially stop China from accessing chips. We saw this a few years back. It didn't really work. Huawei ended up developing their own chips, and China ended up investing a lot of money to solve that problem. But that's one way that you can fight it. You can put sanctions directly on companies, and we saw that DJI was sanctioned, and basically the US tried to stop the sale of DJI drones and basically tried to do the same thing that they did to Huawei, which was to isolate it and shut it down. Again, it didn't really work. Didn't really work with Huawei. It didn't really work with DJI, but they did put it on a technology protective list, saying that US companies can't sell technology to DJI, same as US companies couldn't sell technology to Huawei. And, when we say US companies, that usually extends to most of the Western world. They try to impose this on Japan, they try to impose this on Australia, they try to impose this sanction on the EU, and essentially all of the allies that we consider the West. The United States puts something in place, and then they try and pressure all these other countries to adopt the same policies. We saw that with Huawei, which had limited success at the beginning, and now has created a company that doesn't really need the West anymore, which is essentially more dangerous. So every time that the United States tries to stop China from developing and cutting it off from Western supplies, those companies usually end up getting a lot of government support, and then they start to develop it in-house, which is obviously better for the Chinese company, because then they're not relying on the US for important chips. The whole thing with Taiwan Semiconductor manufacturing companies, I'd have to look up the name of it, TSCM maybe, was a big deal, right? The United States pressured Taiwan not to sell chips to China, and then Huawei said, okay, we'll spend the next 2 or 3 years developing our own chips. And now Huawei doesn't actually need Taiwan Semiconductor chips anymore. And this is the same thing that's happening in the drone market, which is really scary for the United States, because once you have dual-use technologies like drones being manufactured by what you consider an enemy at a very cheap manufacturing cost with very deadly consequences, the end result is, if the United States has an active military of 1.2, 1.3 million active duty, maybe they can bring up 2 or 3 million in total, and China can produce 2 or 3 million drones in a year if they really truly go full out and retrofit some of their factories to produce military drones. Then basically there's a drone for every US soldier. How do you fight that? You can't. And so that's why it's really scary, and why the United States continues to pressure companies like Huawei, continues to pressure companies like DJI, continues to try and disrupt China's growth, because the consequences are, if conflict ever came, the United States is losing its competitive edge day by day, and that's a scary thing. It's really interesting when you start looking at these things, because on the surface you look at DJI and you say it's just a electronic company. They're just developing drones for photography and maybe for some commercial uses in surveying and maps and things like that. It seems pretty harmless, but when you start to dig deeper, you realize that this company could be retrofitted. This company could be quickly switched to military purpose, and that's extremely dangerous for the United States, which is why they go after these companies. So just some thoughts about China's drone industry. It's interesting because I see all these drone footages on the one hand coming out of Ukraine, which is obviously being used in warfare, and then a bunch of drone footage coming out of China, which is usually displays of flowers or fireworks or people's faces. And it's two different worlds, but it could very easily be the same world very quickly if needed. And I think that's why the United States fears China's drone industry so much, is because they see the potential of companies like DJI that could quickly switch to creating cheap military drones. I don't know, what are your thoughts about this? It just something interesting to me. I was looking online and it popped in my head and I thought, that's a very different topic, and also why the United States might have been pressuring DJI recently or in the past to try and limit their growth, because they see it as a threat, whereas most people just see it as cool drones and cool drone footage. There's racing drones, there's photography drones, there's delivery drones now, and so this technology is going to continue to develop, but because it's a dual use technology, it has the potential to be used in warfare. So of course, countries like the United States would prefer that China wasn't developing it, and prefer that China didn't have access to it, because they see China as a threat. My thoughts on this is, I think China just likes developing new technology. We see it all the time. Could it be used that way? Absolutely. But I don't think it'd be used that way unless there's a need for it. And who's creating that need for it? That's the question. Is China creating the need for it, or are other countries forcing China to create those types of drones by their outside forces and outside pressure? What are your thoughts about it? Because I was just browsing online and I saw a couple of things and that got me thinking, do you think China could or would use companies like DJI to produce military drones if they needed to? And why would they produce military drones? Do you think it's because they would be going on the offense, or do you think they'd be using it in defense? Because there's also been a lot of talk about China supplying drones to Russia, which they've denied, saying we don't provide military drones. But the US is saying, well, you don't provide military drones, but you're providing commercial drones, and then they're being refitted into military drones within Russia, which is, obviously an interesting concept. And obviously if it can be done, which it can be done, then China could do it at home if they needed to. What do you guys think? Do you think it's a interesting topic? Would you like me to do a deep dive on the drone industry and write a proper script and actually do the research? Or is it just, whatever, it's one of those topics where the US is being the US and China's being China and nothing's going to change in that case? The US will always look at things from a military standpoint because that's how they view the world, and China will always look at things from a commercial standpoint, in a trading and development standpoint, because that's how they view the world. It's a little bit of a clash of cultures in how you view the world, because the United States often looks at the world in terms of how do we dominate it, how do we control it, and China, at least in my experience, always looks at the world in how can we trade, how can we make money, how can we benefit ourselves essentially by using the other country in a win-win kind of cooperation. Because if you're trading with a country, the country gets something, you get something, obviously you get the money, So China kind of looks at the world that way. Has always seems like the U.S. and the West always looks at the world in a more you're with us or against us stance, where it's all or nothing. Either you submit to us and let us control you, or you're our enemy. And there is no, we can just be traders and life can go on and you do your thing, I'll do my thing. As long as the money's good, I'm willing to trade with you. Anyways, getting off topic because that's a whole nother video to talk about how the world is viewed. Specifically how China views the world, or at least my opinion on how China views the world. Anyways, what do you think? I've been droning on about drones and this topic for a while, so I'm going to leave it at that. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think about China's drone industry. Do you think it's harmless? Or do you think it's one of those industries that they built up with the intention of possibly using it in military applications in the future? Leave a comment below and I will see you in the next video.